Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Jonny Coker. Last week, the Rio Grande Compact Commission met for its annual meeting to discuss a range of issues, including the current state of the southwestern drought and an ongoing legal battle that may well dictate the future of the Rio Grande River. Joining me today to talk about all of this and more is Dr. Phil King, Engineering Advisor for the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, as well as retired NMSU professor. Dr. King, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jonny.
And I wanted to ask about that Compact Commission meeting. The annual meeting was last Friday. For those who don't know, can you explain what that Compact Commission is?
Certainly. In 1938, the states of Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas entered into the Rio Grande Compact, which apportions water among the three states based on the availability of water in the basin. And every year they have a meeting. It rotates from Colorado to New Mexico to Texas. This year it was in Alamosa, Colorado. And that's where the representatives of each state basically settle on the end of year accounting for the previous year. So at this meeting, they were wrapping up 2024.
And what were your biggest takeaways from Friday's meeting that you took away, that will have the biggest impact for New Mexicans?
Well, there's a couple of things that came through loud and clear. First of all, New Mexico has an accrued debit balance or deficit balance on their compact deliveries of 124,000 acre feet. That means they have under-delivered water to Elephant Butte Reservoir by 124,000 acre feet. If that number goes over 200,000 acre feet, then New Mexico is in violation of the compact, and that would certainly have negative impacts both from a financial standpoint and from a water management standpoint. So that was one important outcome. There was a lot of focus on, as you mentioned, the current drought. We're seeing some very, very bad snowpack and projected runoff numbers. We're anticipating a very low water release season from Elephant Butte and Caballo reservoirs this year. We're not going to get started. Our initial release will be on May 30th, with water reaching Las Cruces probably by about May 1st.
I see.
And I'm sorry,
No.
June 1st.
On June 1st.
Right.
I see. And you mentioned that New Mexico is in a rough water year, and I actually watched the most recent Elephant Butte Irrigation District meeting, and you mentioned that Elephant Butte is at 14% capacity, which is a pretty alarming number looking at it. What does that mean in terms of releasing water from the dam, and what does it mean for communities downriver? Because that, like I said, that 14% is pretty jarring.
Well, in New Mexico, all of that surface water goes to irrigation. None of the municipalities or water providers other than Elephant Butte Irrigation District have the ability to treat the water and use it. So it's just EBID. However, that is basically the recharge for the aquifer that everybody uses. And that's really where the problem comes in, is we're reducing the recharge to the aquifer. At the same time, when we have less surface water, farmers pump more water. So more withdrawals, less input. It's kind of a double whammy on the aquifer. And we can see rapidly declining aquifer levels, which will affect everyone.
And can you sort of explain the drought conditions a little bit more that we're seeing? Because I know that snowpack is much lower than it was last year, as well as some other contributing conditions. So can you just lay out what we're seeing environmentally that is going to continue to affect us into this next water year?
Certainly. We're seeing really there's two effects at play here. There's a drought, which is this cyclical phenomenon, excuse me, where we have wetter years and drier years relative to some normal. We are certainly in a drought year, much less snowpack, much less anticipated runoff than last year. But we're also seeing a fundamental and permanent shift towards a more arid climate, where even if we get average snowpack, as we did last year, we see far less than average runoff, making it down to the river and down to Elephant Butte Reservoir. And that's really alarming because we are not getting the same runoff for a given amount of snowfall that we did back when, Las Cruces and Albuquerque and Santa Fe developed. So this is a permanent shift towards a reduced water supply. And there is no getting around that. Eventually it does catch up with us. That is the warmer temperatures we're having up on the watershed mean less snow melts and runs off. And that is not a cyclical thing. That's permanent. That's climate change.
Sure. And are there any other periods in history, whether recent history or maybe much further back, that we can compare to the types of conditions that we're seeing here in New Mexico? Are there places that we can draw on to see just historical examples to see of where we were before versus where we are now?
Well, the closest analog that I think people look back to would be the period of the 1950s through the 1970s. There we had what we would call a precipitation drought, in that it was a drought because there was simply less precipitation, less snowfall, less rain than normal. Right now, we're in a drought that we haven't seen for millennia. Probably, maybe, I don't know. You have to go back pre-human times to get to what we're seeing now, which I would term a heat drought. And that is, we're seeing the reduced flow, not necessarily because of reduced precipitation, but because of higher temperatures throughout the watershed. And so we've had droughts before, but not like this.
Right. And Dr. King, you were one of the authors of the 2022 studies, along with a number of other researchers. You worked on the Leap Ahead analysis, which went on to become or lead to the passage of the 2023 Water Security Planning Act in the state, excuse me. How much progress has been made since the findings of that study? And where do we stand right now in terms of water planning for the future of New Mexico?
Well, I think the Leap Ahead analysis really was, it was a very bleak report. But I think it was New Mexico really taking the first steps to facing what is coming. And the subsequent work by the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force that led to those legislative recommendations. I worked in that group too, and it was a very results oriented group, and I think came up with very good recommendations to the legislature. You don't get everything you ask for. If you don't ask for anything, that's what you get. If you ask for everything, you get pretty much nothing too. So we were asking for something in between. It has not been fully funded. I am hoping in either the last, let's see, what is this, 3, 4, 5, the last couple of legislatures. But I'm hoping that particularly as conditions worsen, the need for action on those areas will drive action from the legislature.
And speaking of that, in wake of the wildfires that we're seeing and the years of drought that New Mexicans have been experiencing, do you feel a shift in the mindset of the general public or of legislators in general? I mean, is there a sense of urgency that you're feeling, or do you think we're still in a period of not enough urgency?
I think we've got, well, certainly not enough urgency. My take is we've got several legislators who really get it and understand the importance of taking action now. The longer we take to react and adapt to the changing conditions, the more difficult and expensive, frankly, it will be. But there are still a lot of people, and I think a lot of laypersons who just want things to go on as they have, forever. And the one thing that I hope we made clear in leap ahead analysis is that status quo is not an option.
And if we do keep following that status quo without doing anything to conserve our water, trying to live the way that we've always lived, I mean, where do you see New Mexico in the next 50 years should, if that were to happen?
Wheels come off. If you look at the Supreme Court litigation now, that is small compared to what will happen if New Mexico's accumulated deficit runs past 200,000 acre feet. Aquifers will start to fail. People's wells will start to go dry. We will have loss of habitat, loss of surface water flows, aquifer exhaustion.
And that is quite a bleak future. But New Mexico does have the Water Security Planning Act. I wanted to ask a little bit about that. We talked a little bit last year about public outreach in terms of the regional water planning process. So I just wanted to ask, where do we stand on that right now? How did that public outreach go, and where are we in that water planning process?
I've been very impressed with the regional water planning process. I'm actually involved through the Interstate Stream Commission with that as well. And I've been through 2 rounds of water planning in the past, in the early 2000s and then in the 2010s. We had rounds of water planning. And, frankly, they weren't all that meaningful or productive. The first round was better. The last one was just kind of list all the projects you want to do and here's your plan. But this one is different. I think that's led by the Interstate Stream Commission. Their planning group has been very active in seeking public input. They're in kind of a very difficult situation because you want all sorts of public involvement. You want to hear everybody's voice, but you've also got to get something done. And it's a balancing act. Their initial phases have been largely seeking input on the promulgation of rules and development of guidelines for the planning process. The planning process will start will get serious this year, actually active this year. And I think that is where water planners, the entities that come together in the individual regions need to really take a hard look at their future, with no rose-colored glasses. This is going to be difficult for every single region in the state. And they need to do what's necessary, in a planned fashion rather than letting nature take its course, because nature can be quite cruel.
I see. And in terms of that water planning process, you talk about that getting serious this year. What is this going to look like for communities in New Mexico?
Well, one of the key features of the regional planning effort is you have to recognize that New Mexico has extraordinarily diverse hydrology and extraordinarily diverse cultures in it. That's one of the reasons people like to live in New Mexico. It's such a diverse place. And so there is no one size fits all. And really for it to be effective, the planning has to come sort of from the region up, has to be developed locally and then, polished and sharpened with state input and implemented with state input. So you will see the major water providers participating. In the Lower Rio Grande efforts in the past, we had City of Las Cruces, NMSU, EBID, Doña Ana County, Mutual Domestics, the usual suspects, as we say, all participating, and they have to come together in a collaborative setting and chart the region's water future.
Mm. And that seems to be somewhat of a chaotic thing with talking about water planning on any scale, but having to pull all these stakeholders together and have these conversations and find meaningful solutions to what we're facing. Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, how easy is it, or how difficult is it to collaborate with all these entities and find things to be done to make sure that we don't run out of this precious resource?
Well, I think first of all, in my experience, the participants in previous regional water planning efforts in the Lower Rio Grande, for example, and those that'll be participating in the future one, certainly have their clients' interest, the people who they're representing, their interests in mind. But from everyone, I hear a very primary concern with the overall future of the region. So, for example, Elephant Butte Irrigation District doesn't want to see the City of Las Cruces water supply cut off. The City of Las Cruces doesn't want irrigated agriculture to cease in the Mesilla Valley. There's a reason why people like to live in Las Cruces rather than Phoenix. And so I think there is, in spite of the petty squabbles, there is a larger sense of purpose and community among the water users.
Mm. And with that in mind, in terms of debates and squabbles and interest groups, I wanted to ask a little bit about this year's legislative session. With that 2025 session behind us, how would you rank the work done by lawmakers in terms of water conservation efforts and bills to address what we're talking about? What's your take?
Well, I obviously have a biased perspective, and I'll always think they could have done more, but there were some significant accomplishments in this last legislature, and I'm hoping and even confident that will continue in the 2026 legislature.
Mm. And I wanted to ask specifically about HB 137, signed by the governor in early April. The Strategic Water Supply Program is aimed at promoting treatment of brackish water in industrial uses for the sake of keeping freshwater resources, for the sake of preserving fresh water. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on potentially, getting that brackish water and using it for being able to use it in industrial uses?
I think it's a valuable resource. It's one that we've not used in the past just because cheap fresh water was available. I did spend several years working on a feasibility study for a desalination plant, brackish water desalination plant down in the Santa Teresa area, specifically targeting the industrial development down there as a reliable source of water that was not connected to the river. And that's going along well. So there's a lot of potential. The one thing I would stress, though, is that it is not going to fix everything. It is not a magic bullet, not by a long shot. I think of it as sort of niche water, where it's going to be expensive. There's a lot of technical complexity to it. But if you have something like a community with some resources or an industrial park, they can certainly take advantage of that as a water supply. But the quantities of water that we're talking about with brackish desalination out of a plant, it's a few thousand acre feet a year, maybe low tens of thousands of acre feet per year would be a big operation. Uh, the systematic shortfall that we're going to see in our runoff is hundreds of thousands of acre feet. So it's an order of magnitude from just fixing the status quo.
I see. And something on the same note that I wanted to ask about, something that was nixed from that bill was funding for produced water projects. For those that don't know, produced water is, a toxic byproduct of oil and gas drilling. And I wanted to get your take. How do you feel about produced water research in terms of, its feasibility in the state's water conservation efforts? Do you think that's something that the legislature should come back to, or is it not worth even squabbling over? What's your take?
Well, first off, disclaimer: I'm not a produced water person. That's geographically. I've focused most of my career on the Lower Rio Grande and the Rio Grande corridor, so that's a little outside of my area. But I certainly wouldn't discard it. I think the evolution of the Strategic Water Planning Act has been very positive in sort of not focusing so heavily on it, but by no means do we want to just discard that as a possibility. I think we need to continue the research to develop the technology, some pilot projects as sort of proof of concept, and there's a lot of things to deal with, disposal of the concentrate and so on. But as water gets scarcer, like we wouldn't have looked at brackish water as a resource even 20 years ago.
And
times change.
No, absolutely. And one thing you talked about is more can always be done at the state legislature. What are some things on your wish list for future legislative sessions that you think really need to be taken seriously by the state's leaders in terms of water conservation efforts? Like what more would you like to see being done?
Well, the one thing that jumps right out at me would be fully funding the Water Security Planning Act. The regional water planning is absolutely critical to the state's water future. That's where things get done. And so as the regions enter into this regional water planning effort, they need the resources, they need the technical support to really make it a productive effort.
I see. And from an engineering perspective, I mean, what kind of infrastructure investment is needed to support more efficient and resilient water systems in the state, especially as we talk about, rural areas and underserved areas of the state?
Well, particularly with a lot of the rural areas and the underserved areas, there's a lot of deferred maintenance that needs to be, we need to catch up on. And I think a major investment in rehabilitating, updating a lot of the regional water suppliers is absolutely necessary. There's a real problem also with staffing. If you've got a water treatment plant, you need somebody who's qualified to run it, or you put your entire community at risk. So getting the resources to people so that we can get trained operators, make that an interesting career, basically, as a trained and certified operator. So there's the technical side, there's the personnel side. Then there's a lot of infrastructure that we're going to have to think of really modifying or even creating to deal with this new climate that we're in. Modifying flood control structures so that Instead of evacuating water downstream, maybe you try to infiltrate it for aquifer recharge where it's possible. In some places that creates other problems because there may have been somebody downstream with a right to that water. But in many places, particularly in the lower Rio Grande, we've got great opportunities to use stormwater for aquifer recharge and at the same time enhancing our flood protection. So it's a kind of a win-win situation in that case.
I see. And Dr. King, we are out of time, but I did want to ask just one more question that I feel is very pressing. You know, you do use a lot of data gathered using federal government resources, whether it's USGS, NOAA, the USDA. Are there ongoing conversations, you know, surrounding federal funding cuts and the potential loss of like analytical tools that you use? Is that something that has affected you? Are there contingency plans? Where are we at on all of that in terms of your own work?
Well, it's very early on in that process. I have not really suffered from, you know, my data sources going down or things like that. A lot of my colleagues in the federal agencies whom I work with, you know, very closely are certainly stretched a lot thinner, you know, dealing with personnel issues and shuffling around. So I am very concerned that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
That is something that we will stay on top of, but I really appreciate you coming in today to talk with me, Dr. King. It's always enlightening to hear from you.
Always a pleasure, Johnny.
Of course. And that's all for today's episode. Remember, you can stay up to date on the latest local news at krwg.org. For all of us here at KRWG Public Media, I'm Jonny Coker, and we'll see you next time on Fronteras, A Changing America.